wanted to take a few minutes today to speak from my heart to the Daystar family and friends.
Joni Lamb's silence about Marcus's final moments has left more questions than answers. Why has she remained so quiet about the details of his last hours? What is she hiding? In a shocking turn, new revelations are coming to light, and what Joni didn't share may change everything we thought we knew about Marcus's death. Was there more going on than anyone realized? The truth behind her silence speaks volumes, and now it's time for the full story to finally come out. Prepare for the shocking details that were kept hidden for so long. Marcus Lamb's death in November 2021 came as a shock to the Christian community. The leader of Daystar television network, he was a well-known and powerful figure, admired by millions for his bold faith and strong convictions. His passing, officially attributed to complications from COVID-19, caught many by surprise, especially since he had been an outspoken critic of lockdowns and vaccine mandates. To many, his sudden death seemed like an irony too harsh to comprehend. But while the world mourned, something didn't sit right with those who were closest to him. Behind the scenes, at Daystar, a quiet sense of doubt began to grow. People who had worked with Marcus for years, who had seen the way he ran things, started to ask questions that no one wanted to voice. Marcus was known for being meticulous and hands-on. Every show, every guest, every broadcast, nothing went ahead without his approval. He was in charge, and everyone knew it. So when he passed, people expected things to slow down, to stop for a moment, as the ministry and the Lamb family took time to grieve. But that wasn't what happened.
At your mother's request, we called you back in here for John could talk to you, and we give you 24 hours from the time we signed this. That's roughly 2:30 to 3 o'clock tomorrow. If you can sign that, come back in to Arnold's office, sign the piece of paper, okay? Read it, do you comfortable with it, and then sign the piece of paper tomorrow. You have until basically, I say 3 o'clock. That's 24 hours from the time to sign. If you do not do that, then you are removing yourself from the board and removing yourself from your vice president position, and you are then an employee. You're still an employee. That's where we are.
Almost immediately after Marcus's death, the direction of Daystar seemed to shift. Projects that had previously been paused were suddenly moving forward. Internal meetings began to take on a different tone. The staff, many of whom had been with the network for years, began to notice changes in the way things were being handled, the speed at which decisions were being made, the new urgency in the air. Something felt off. People started to wonder if there was more going on behind the scenes than anyone was letting on. Was Marcus's death really as sudden and unexpected as it seemed? Or had there been signs that were never publicly discussed? It wasn't just the changes within Daystar that raised suspicions. It was Joni Lamb's reaction to her husband's death. While the rest of the world saw her as the grieving widow, Joni seemed calm, almost too calm. She was composed, focused, and ready to step into the role of leader. While some expected her to take time away to mourn, she dove straight into the responsibilities of running Daystar. Decisions that might have waited for months were being made within days. She wasn't just carrying on Marcus's legacy, she was pushing the network in a new direction, one that many people didn't understand. For those who had been close to Marcus, this swift transition didn't feel natural. There were whispers, quiet doubts that grew louder with each passing day. How could Joni be so focused, so prepared, so unshaken by the loss of her husband? Some staff members began to wonder if she had been preparing for this moment long before Marcus's death. Was it possible that Joni had known what was coming? That she had already mapped out a plan for the future of Daystar even before Marcus's health had taken a turn for the worse? The most unsettling part of all this was the feeling that Marcus's death wasn't as sudden as it seemed. Some people started to question whether Marcus had been unwell for longer than anyone had realized. Had his health been in decline for months, or was his death truly a sudden shock? People who had worked closely with him began to feel like they were missing pieces of the puzzle. They wondered why Marcus had been so absent in the studio in the weeks leading up to his death. Why had his voice continued to appear on broadcasts even when he wasn't physically present? The more they thought about it, the more questions they had, and the more the official story about Marcus's death didn't add up. In the days and weeks following Marcus's death, the sense of unease grew. The transition at Daystar felt too smooth, too calculated. While everyone else mourned, Joni was already making decisions and pushing forward with plans that seemed to have been put into motion long before her husband's death. The speed of the changes, the way she took charge, and the new faces that began appearing in leadership roles made people question whether the ministry they had built together was really going in the direction Marcus would have wanted. The death of Marcus Lamb was a tragedy. But behind the mourning, a deeper story was unfolding. The questions about his health, the rapid shifts in leadership, and Joni's calm and composed reaction to it all left many people wondering, was this truly a loss that no one saw coming? Or was there more to the story that was being kept hidden?
Now, technically, we had to pass a motion to do that because technically you were gone. You had already removed yourself from the board.
You dismissed me.
Well, because you did not do it. Technically, you removed yourself from the board.
I didn't remove myself. You
removed yourself
dismissed
from
me.
Vice President. At her request, we passed a motion to give you 24 hours to reconsider. Before you get your letter from Daystar telling you that's what the situation is. Now, you with me? You understand?
I understand.
So until 3 o'clock tomorrow, you have to go home, pray, talk, do whatever you want to, then come back into Arnold's office and read that until you're comfortable to sign it or not sign it.
Okay.
And if you sign it, then we are bound, you're bound by it just like the rest of it.
Yeah.
If you don't sign it, you have removed yourself from the board and removed yourself from the officer of Daystar.
I wouldn't have removed myself. That would be her decision.
That's the effect of not signing.
That's the effect of you not signing it. You're doing it.
What he's saying is this board didn't remove you. Your decision not to sign this is what's going to remove you.
Joni Lamb's immediate transition to leadership after Marcus's sudden death in November 2021 took everyone by surprise. While the world mourned the passing of the beloved Daystar founder, Joni's actions in the days that followed painted a very different picture. As the grieving widow, she was expected to step back and process the loss of her husband, a man she had worked beside for decades. But instead, Joni did the exact opposite. She stepped forward, taking charge of the network with surprising speed and confidence. The speed of this transition was unsettling to many. Marcus had been the face of Daystar for so long, a charismatic and bold leader who had shaped the network into a powerful platform for Christian broadcasting. His death, though unexpected, was assumed to be a time for reflection, mourning, and a period of adjustment for those closest to him. But Joni didn't show the typical signs of a grieving widow. Instead of stepping back and allowing the ministry to pause, she immediately began making decisions that shaped the future of Daystar. Joni's actions in the days after Marcus's death were swift and decisive. It wasn't long before she started holding meetings, making executive decisions, and even restructuring the network's leadership. Staff members who had worked alongside Marcus for years started to notice that things were moving much faster than they expected. Projects that Marcus had previously paused or shelved were suddenly back in play, as if nothing had changed. The momentum of the network, which had previously slowed to a halt after Marcus's death, seemed to pick up speed under Joni's leadership. It felt like she was carrying on without missing a beat. Some staff members tried to rationalize the changes. Perhaps Joni was simply trying to stay busy, they thought. Maybe she was grieving in her own way, processing her pain through action rather than stillness. But as the days went on, it became clearer that this wasn't just about grief. Joni wasn't just trying to keep things running smoothly. She was actively reshaping Daystar. She wasn't merely carrying on Marcus's legacy. She was forging a new path, one that didn't seem to involve the same values or priorities that Marcus had once championed. One of the most striking aspects of Joni's leadership transition was how quickly she took charge. She didn't hesitate or wait for permission. While some of the staff expected her to take some time off, to reflect on her husband's death and adjust to the monumental loss, Joni didn't do that. She immediately began making decisions, calling meetings and reshuffling staff. Projects that had been put on hold, either due to Marcus's illness or simply because they weren't a priority at the time, suddenly gained new urgency. This sudden surge of activity raised questions about whether Joni had been planning this all along. To those who had worked closely with Marcus, this swift transition felt too rehearsed, too planned. It was as if Joni had already been preparing herself for this moment, as if she had mentally and emotionally anticipated Marcus's death long before it happened. The speed at which she took control felt more like a business move than a natural response to the loss of her husband. It didn't feel like a widow grieving, it felt like a CEO taking over a corporation. The new leadership and direction at Daystar felt less like a grieving widow stepping into her husband's shoes, and more like someone who had already mapped out a new era for the network before Marcus's passing. The change in tone was also noticeable. Joni, who had always been soft-spoken and approachable, became more assertive in her new role. She wasn't just the grieving widow anymore. She was now in charge, making tough decisions and pushing the network forward. Some staff members noticed that her tone in meetings had shifted from the calm, reassuring presence they were used to something more commanding and decisive. There was no room for second-guessing, no room for hesitation. The direction Joni was taking, Daystar felt firm, almost as if she had already made up her mind about where the network was headed. Joni's shift into leadership wasn't just about the decisions she made. It was also about how quickly she made them. Within days of Marcus's death, Joni had already started implementing changes that would affect the future of the network. Some of these changes were financial, others were organizational, and still others were about the direction Daystar would take in terms of its content. Staff members who had been part of the Daystar family for years started to feel like they were being pushed aside, their voices silenced in favor of Joni's new vision. The sense of alienation among longtime staff members grew as they watched Joni move so swiftly. Some felt like they were no longer a part of the family, that the values Marcus had instilled in the network were being replaced by something else. Joni's new leadership style wasn't about the values of faith and trust that Daystar had once been known for. It was about efficiency, control, and moving things forward at all costs. Staff members who had worked side by side with Marcus, who had shared his vision and helped build the network from the ground up, started to question whether the ministry they had helped create was now being transformed into something they didn't recognize. One of the most shocking aspects of Joni's transition to leadership was the role of Dr. Doug Weiss, a counselor who had been a frequent guest on Daystar and who was known for his work in relationships and healing. Doug had been involved with the Lamb family for years, offering counseling and support during difficult times. But after Marcus's death, Doug's presence at Daystar became more than just that of a guest or advisor. He became a close confidant to Joni, and his involvement in internal meetings and decision-making grew rapidly. To many staff members, Doug's increasing role in Daystar's operations seemed like more than just friendly support. It felt like he was becoming an integral part of the new leadership structure. Some of the staff had a hard time accepting this new reality. It wasn't that they didn't appreciate Doug's contributions. They did. But the timing of his involvement raised suspicions. Why was he so involved in Daystar's operations so soon after Marcus's death? Why was Joni leaning on him so heavily for advice and guidance when she had her own network of trusted advisors? To many, Doug's growing influence didn't just signal a change in leadership. It felt like a shift in power, one that was happening too quickly for anyone to fully understand. As Joni took the reins, the atmosphere inside Daystar became one of uncertainty. Staff members who had been loyal to Marcus started to question the direction of the network. Was this still the ministry Marcus had built, or was it something entirely new? The speed with which Joni took charge and the way she reshaped Daystar's leadership left many wondering if she had been prepared for this moment all along. Her calm demeanor and quick actions suggested that this was more than just a grieving widow stepping into a new role. It was a calculated move to take control of the network and guide it into a new era. Joni Lamb's immediate transition to leadership wasn't just about filling the shoes of her late husband. It was about reshaping Daystar into something that was entirely her own vision. While some saw her as a strong leader stepping into a difficult role, others saw it as a power grab, a transition that had been planned long before Marcus's death. The pace at which she moved, the decisions she made, and the way she relied on others like Doug Weiss raised questions about whether Joni was truly grieving or already preparing for what was to come. In the end, her actions were a testament to her strength, but also to the complex, sometimes unsettling reality of what happens when a network, a family, and a ministry experience a sudden and unexpected loss. The discovery of Joni Lamb's diary was a turning point in the unfolding drama surrounding Marcus Lamb's death and the subsequent changes at Daystar. It wasn't just a personal journal. It became the key to unraveling what many began to suspect was a much more complicated story than anyone realized. What started as a quiet whisper grew louder as pieces of the diary, passed hand to hand among trusted staff and family members, slowly began to reveal a side of Joni that no one had expected. The diary had been hidden, kept private, as it should have been, an intimate place for Joni to process her thoughts during a time of immense loss. However, what people found in those pages didn't align with the public image of the grieving widow that Joni was presenting. The entries weren't filled with the raw emotion one might expect from someone mourning their husband's sudden death. Instead, they painted a different picture. A picture of emotional distance, resignation, and a level of detachment that made many wonder whether Joni had already mentally and emotionally moved on before Marcus's death even occurred. The first few pages that were circulated were innocuous enough. There was talk of grief, of loss, and of the weight of the responsibility that Joni now found herself bearing. But as people read on, they began to notice a tone that was unsettling. There were no outbursts of anger or frustration, no desperate cries for help. Instead, there was a calmness that struck some readers as cold. It wasn't that Joni wasn't grieving, she was, but it was the manner in which she wrote about her grief that caught people off guard. It felt like someone who had already accepted the inevitable, someone who had prepared herself for what was coming, even before it happened. One entry stood out in particular. It was written just days before Marcus was hospitalized. The words read, "Everything is coming into view now. I just have to stay quiet. Let it unfold. God sees." To some, it seemed like a simple spiritual reflection, an acceptance of God's plan. But to those who knew the Lamb family well, who had seen the emotional strain between Joni and Marcus in recent months, it sounded different. It sounded like a woman who had already come to terms with what was about to happen. The calmness in her words didn't match the emotional turmoil one would expect from someone in her position. The more people read, the more questions began to surface. Had Joni been preparing for Marcus's death before it happened? Had she emotionally checked out long before he passed? There was no clear answer in the diary, but the growing sense of unease among those who read it was impossible to ignore. Some began to suspect that Joni's apparent calm after Marcus's death wasn't a sign of strength or faith. It was a sign that she had already anticipated. The way she seamlessly took control of Daystar, the speed at which she reorganized the network, and the way she leaned so heavily on Dr. Doug Weiss for support, all seemed to line up with the tone of the diary. It felt like Joni had already mapped out her next steps long before Marcus's passing. But it wasn't just the content of the diary that raised doubts. It was the secrecy surrounding it. The fact that a private journal, one that was never meant to be seen, had surfaced at all was troubling. People began to question how the diary had been leaked in the first place. Who had seen it, and how had they gotten access to such a personal document? The whispers about the diary began to spread like wildfire, with some people claiming that Joni's emotions had been hidden behind a facade, while others speculated that it was a calculated move to prepare for her leadership role. Whether Joni had intentionally kept the diary private, or whether it was just a series of unintentional revelations, one thing was clear. The truth behind Marcus's death was not as simple as it had been portrayed. As more of the diary's contents began to leak out, the emotional weight of what was being revealed became heavier. Some entries described a relationship between Joni and Marcus that had been slowly unraveling over time. There was talk of silence in the home, of emotional distance, and of a marriage that was no longer the close partnership it once had been. While there were no explosive accusations or dramatic confessions in the diary, the subtle undertones of the entries made it clear that the emotional connection between Joni and Marcus had shifted in the months leading up to his death. One entry in particular struck a chord with those who read it. "He's not listening anymore. Not to me. Not to anyone." It was a haunting statement, one that spoke volumes about the state of their relationship at the time. For some, this was a revelation that changed everything they thought they knew about Joni. The woman they had seen on television, the grieving widow who had so publicly mourned her husband's death, now appeared to be someone who had already begun to mentally and emotionally detach herself from the marriage. And that raised even more questions about her role in Daystar's future. Had Joni been preparing for this transition for longer than anyone realized? Had she already decided, in her own mind, that she would take control of the network once Marcus was gone? The discovery of the diary also fueled suspicion about the timing of the leadership changes at Daystar. In the days immediately following Marcus's death, legal documents were filed and property was transferred. Daystar's leadership structure was reorganized with incredible speed. Some former staff members and insiders were shocked at how quickly everything was happening, almost as though it had been planned well in advance. Joni stepped into her new role as Daystar's leader without hesitation, and Dr. Doug Weiss, who had been a longtime friend of the family, quickly became a central figure in the decision-making process. The speed at which these changes occurred felt like more than just a natural response to Marcus's death. It felt like a prearranged plan, one that had been set in motion before anyone could even begin to process the loss. The growing doubt among Daystar staff members only intensified as they continued to discuss the diary's contents. Some believed it was a personal matter, something that didn't need to be scrutinized, while others felt that the revelations in the diary were crucial to understanding what had really happened behind closed doors. The diary didn't provide all the answers, but it sparked a series of questions that no one could ignore. Had Joni been emotionally prepared for Marcus's death? Had she already taken steps to position herself as the leader of Daystar? Was the transition to her leadership really a natural process, or had it been planned long before Marcus's death? The discovery of Joni's diary didn't just change the way people viewed the Lamb family. It reshaped the narrative surrounding Marcus's death and the future of Daystar. What had initially been seen as a sudden and tragic loss now seemed like the beginning of a larger, more complex story. Joni's calmness in the face of her husband's death, her swift transition to leadership, and the secrecy surrounding the diary all combined to create a sense of unease that no one could easily shake. The whispers of doubt grew louder, and the truth, whatever it may be, remained hidden in the pages of a diary that was never meant to be seen.